Welcome to this episode of Adam Answers. For this time, I'm going to answer a question that came in from Kevin Naidu. I hope I'm saying your name right. But Kevin asks, what would you do from an SFBT perspective with a client who has chronic suicidal ideation? And then there's a follow-up question that says, how do you get them to see a future when they are stuck or convinced the only solution they have is to die? So that's an excellent question. And one of the things that I would say is, I'm going to break down a couple of the words that you used. The first word that I want to talk about is the word chronic, right? The idea is if they have chronic suicidality, that's different than acute suicidality. And I think the only distinction that I would make between those things is how we measure in time. Just because somebody's having acute suicidality right this moment, we don't know if that's not going to become something that's reoccurring, or if somebody's had chronic suicidality, we don't know if tomorrow's the day that that chronic suicidality goes away. One of the amazing things about suicidality is that it isn't something that necessarily persists forever. We know there's many cases where people who have felt suicidal for long periods of time no longer feel suicidal. So I think one of the things that I would say in there is don't get stuck on the concept of chronic suicidality, because something that was chronic could now become something that used to be. So I think that's the first thing. So that kind of morphs the question a bit into what do you do, or how is a solution-focused perspective in dealing with suicidality in general, whether it's chronic or acute. And one of the things that I would begin with is to say there's lots and lots of good research out there that talks about how to deal with suicidality from a solution-focused perspective. I would point you to the work of Heather Fisk. She's written about this quite a bit. And so she's a good person to talk to. But one of the things that I would say right up at the front is that suicidality isn't really the desire to die. What I would say is typically suicidality comes because of a loss of hope. That people in essence are saying, I no longer have hope that things could get better or that things could change. And so that from a solution-focused perspective is a really important distinction, because our job is to begin a session by saying, what is your best hopes? What's your greatest desire? And somebody who's experiencing suicidal thoughts or ideation might say, I don't really have any hope. Or the only hope I have is that the feelings that I'm feeling now will go away. I want them to end. And the best way that I know is that if I end my life. And so the thing that I would say is that we as solution-focused professionals need to remember that it's our job to infuse hope into our questions, each and every question that we have. So one thing that I would say about how to address suicidality is to begin just like we always begin. What are your best hopes? And knowing that people might struggle to answer that question. And it's through the struggle that they begin to see that perhaps there's some reason that they have in order to continue to hope. So we need to be able to utilize their words, and we might need to be able, if they say, I don't really have much hope right now. Then we hear that, I don't have much hope. And we say, understanding that you don't have much hope, if you found even a glimmer of the remaining hope that you had left, and you could tell me what that hope might lead to, what would you hope we could get to in that vein? And they might still struggle, and they'd say, I don't know, it's been so long since I've even felt hope. I don't even know. I have no idea. And you can say, well, it makes a lot of sense that you've spent a lot of time feeling like this. If you and I could crack the code a bit, and even if it's been a long time, if today was the first day that you started to feel a little bit of hope, what would you be most pleased to be hoping? Even if this was just day one. So we need to utilize their language, and we need to emphasize, I understand this is hard, I understand you've felt this way for a long time. So one of the things that we need to do is infuse hope without discounting how hard their situation is. The second thing I would say is that we need to remember that these kinds of conversations, simply because of the way that they're focused, help people to begin to experience positive emotion. So when people even begin to think about hope, or when they begin to think about what they would like to feel instead of feeling suicidal, then what that does is in their body, they have no possible way to reject this, it helps them to begin to just feel a little bit better. They begin to feel maybe a little bit of happiness. They begin to feel maybe a little bit of excitement. They begin to feel maybe a little bit of hope. And when they feel that positive emotion, one of the things that we know from Barbara Fredrickson is that positive emotion begins to expand possibilities. Things that they couldn't imagine, things that they couldn't see in their mind's eye before, all of a sudden become options. So one of the things that's really important and valuable to think about with suicidal people, and then one of the reasons I say that it is about the lack of hope, is that the positive emotion that they haven't felt for a really long time, in essence, has whittled down until they have one possibility. They say, the only thing that could actually help me feel better is if I end my life. And as we begin to have conversations that are hopeful or hope-filled, their possibilities begin to open. And then they think some things like, well, maybe if I talked to a friend, maybe that would change my situation a bit, or maybe that would give me the desire to stick around for just a little bit longer. Or maybe if I did this thing that I've always kind of wanted to do, maybe that would give me at least enough motivation or drive to stick around for a little bit. And as they begin to feel that positive emotion, things that haven't been a possibility for a long time all of a sudden become possibilities. So I think embedded in your question was, what if the only thing they can see is that dying is the only option? And I would say that very likely is the case. But if we have solution-focused conversations, what would you hope for? What would be different? If somebody that you loved was here and they were able to tell me what would make the biggest difference to you, or what they remember about you that they particularly love, all of those kinds of questions begin to change the way they feel. They begin to feel this positive emotion. And now they begin to formulate options that weren't options before. So I think from a solution-focused perspective, we do a couple of things. We embed hope into each of our questions. We don't get hooked on the things like chronic suicidality versus acute suicidality. And instead we just say, this is somebody who wants transformation. They want to not feel this way anymore, or they want to not think this way anymore. And the other thing I think that we do is that we help them to feel positive emotion and trust that that will expand their options. So we do the same thing that we do in lots of solution-focused brief therapy conversations, is that we trust our client that if they have this kind of conversation, it will change who they are. And when they change who they are, that other person can deal with suicidal thoughts or ideations, or that new version of them will be more hopeful and optimistic and won't feel suicidal anymore. So one of the things that I would say is we need to just trust that having this kind of conversation is backed with enough science that it can literally change the version of the person that we're talking to into a person who can manage suicidal thoughts, or who can completely get rid of suicidal thoughts or ideations. And so I think one of the things that I would say is you build conversations that change the person you're talking with. So I hope that's helpful. Let me know what your thoughts are. I'd love to hear any feedback you have.